Rachael Raymond has worked in male-dominated industries her whole career and sadly is no stranger to gender bias and discrimination. She is now the head of broker sales at Funding Circle, and on today's episode, we discuss how to be unapologetically you, stay true to your core values and speak up for prejudice. I felt so empowered after this chat where Rachael showed real examples of where she's been hit by sexism and how she had the resilience and courage to overcome it. Throughout this episode, we discuss authenticity, adaptability and confidence. I'm so excited for you to feel inspired by this conversation and have the courage yourself to put the advice into action at your workplace. Let's get into it. Hi everyone, welcome to the next episode of Sales Unfiltered. Today I am joined by Rachael Raymond to chat about being unapologetically you and coming up against disparity in the industry. Rachael, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now I'm really looking forward to speaking to you because as we know there is huge disparity in terms of gender within tech sales for women, but specifically in the finance tech sector that you work in. You wrote a recent blog post and you quoted that a 2022 report by PwC saw that women now represent 22% of partners at venture capital firms, up from 15% a decade ago, which is an increase, which is good, but there's still a stark difference.
For sure. I do still think we've got a fair whack to go, but I think honestly, at this point, any improvement is solid improvement. We should celebrate when we see it, which we're definitely seeing, which is fantastic. I think fundamentally it is going to take time because I think the things that we're now bedding in at a much more junior level are going to ultimately take time to mature, and it's going to take time to see people come through, and we're going to see that equality and less disparity at a senior level, but I think we're definitely getting there.
Yeah. I mean, it's nice to see the changes, although slow, and you're like, come on, let's get quicker.
For sure.
Have you seen that change since you started? Have you always been in FinTech?
No, haven't always worked in FinTech. So actually studied English literature at university, so quite different. And then I actually thought I wanted to go into law for a while, so I worked in law in the forensic accountancy space. Then moved into at the M&A space, so worked for a boutique M&A firm in the healthcare sector. Then moved into kind of the FinTech world where I've been in lots of different places, lots of different roles. Started in kind of tech for M&A, then moved into pay tech, and now obviously I'm at Funding Circle. So
nice. So always industries that are quite male dominated.
Yeah, pretty heavily male dominated. Yeah, absolutely. It's not by design. It's definitely just by kind of what enticed me at the time. It's been, I think, through my career, I'm definitely now in a place where I feel like I see the most equality, I guess, in terms of gender. But that definitely hasn't always been the case. And yeah, it's sometimes been, I guess, quite difficult in those situations to kind of, I guess, see yourself in a role or a future with those companies when there's no one there that kind of looks like you, I guess, in a way. So that's, I guess, always been something that has been at the back of my mind. But I have been quite fortunate in the sense that I've had a lot of really good role models, a lot of really good mentors through my time, both kind of male and female, that have definitely kind of got me to where I am today. So.
Amazing. And all of those mentors, I'm sure, have given you the courage to be unapologetically yourself. And when we were discussing what topic to talk about today, I know something that you're really passionate about and that you've definitely highlighted in your career is staying true to your values, your purpose, and having that courage to speak up in what you believe and call people out for behaviour that's inappropriate. Because I think when we have this disparity, it's not down to one person to make that change. It's down to everybody, yourself included, and everybody to speak up and stay true to that. So one of the topics that we want to start with is this authenticity piece, which I know is something you're really passionate about. And when you look at authenticity, I think it's really important to have strong values. So I would love to ask, what are those values that you live your life and career by?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, it's about being truthful and being open and being honest. I fundamentally think that no matter where you work, the foundations of your career are going to be built on the relationships that you actually build. And I found that to be true across all the different industries that I've worked in and all the different roles. It's particularly true now where I'm at Funding Circle. The teams that I manage work in the intermediary space. So it's all about the relationships you build in order to bring that business into the business. But I actually think that's, it's relevant and that's consistent everywhere, essentially. And I think being authentic to yourself and standing by the values that you have really will set you apart in the market fundamentally.
Yeah. And I think it's really important that not only do you know what those values are, but you also embody them in every walk of life. And specifically, we talk about having a personal brand on social media, but I think it's so important when you are talking about being authentic to have that internal brand. So how have you made sure that you've built that Funding Circle or your previous companies so that people around you know, oh, Rachael, she's an authentic person and she stays true to her word? Is that a thing? Can you say I've never described somebody as being an authentic person, but you know what I mean?
For sure. I think that maybe goes against the idea of what it's supposed to stand for, right? But yeah, no, I'd like to think so. I think for me, it's always about being curious. So I've tried to be curious, and I still do try to be curious every day in everything that I do. And I think fundamentally, as long as you're authentic in that and you're not asking things or saying things because you think it's the right thing to say, like be genuinely curious in what you're doing. And if you're not curious in what you're doing, maybe that's not the right thing and the right path for you. Find something that interests you enough to kind of push past what is maybe your responsibility and kind of really go out and learn and grow in that space.
Yeah. Can you ever tell when somebody's not being authentic? Like if you're interviewing in your team, is that, I'm guessing that's something that you look for? What are those kind of probing questions?
100%.
Because everyone will put their best foot forward and try and appear as a character.
100%. I think it's quite difficult to kind of like quantify. I hear it all the time in interviews when we're interviewing for people in the team. I hear it all the time when I get salespeople approach me for different tech stacks and things like that. You can tell when people are saying things because they think it's the right thing to say versus what they actually think and believe. And I think there's so much more value. And what you end up doing is building credibility by asking the real questions and actually, by asking the real questions and actually presenting what you feel to be the real truth.
So put this into an example. You work in sales, you lead sales teams. If you're building that authentic relationship with customers or new customers, what are those difficult questions that you're asking to kind of have that real relationship?
Yeah, 100%. I always think it's really important to get behind actually the motivations for whatever this is, right? Whether it's a sale, whether it's building a relationship for a longer term play, whatever it is, really get into the crux of what that person's motivations are or that business's motivations are. Because when you understand the why, it's going to be so much easier to service in the long term.
Yeah. And I'm guessing there's a lot of mirroring as well in this when you are building those relationships. Talk me through, because you probably come across so many people that maybe have different personality traits to you working in the finance sector.
100%.
You're not always going to have like bubbly people talking to you. It might be quite difficult. So how do you navigate building that authentic relationship with somebody that you wouldn't necessarily have a relationship with outside?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's definitely difficult. And you know what, actually something which I feel like I've developed over time is realizing that there is so much value in not hiring just like cookie cutter people. There's actually so much value in hiring people that are really, really different to you because they challenge you and they push you to think differently. And that's how eventually, like ultimately, that's how you end up with like diverse thinking in a business, which I think is the most valuable thing you can have. I actually don't think that you need to embody that person in order to build a strong relationship with them. I think ultimately, as long as you can find common goals, you can actually build that relationship towards whatever that common goal is, as long as you can try and service that.
Yeah. And moving on to the resilience and the adaptability piece, I know that it's really important that you follow your gut, and I'm sure everybody listening has these times where they know what they stand for, they have strong beliefs, but they didn't necessarily like have the resilience to be able to follow what they thought was right. Can you give us some examples of how you didn't, like a time maybe where you didn't follow your gut and speak up and what the repercussions were? And then I'll ask you the question of when you did and it went well.
Yeah, absolutely. Gosh, like there's been so many times, like I've made 100 mistakes, 1,000 mistakes in my career to date, right? But I think we were talking about this before actually, that if you hadn't made all those mistakes, do you think you'd actually still be in the place you are today? No, because I think I learned from those and that's built me up to who I am today. There's been a number of times where, for instance, like early in my career, I've taken a job because the pay was right, but I didn't believe in the company or the mission, right? That's a bad mistake to make, but I think ultimately I learned a lot from that experience and have applied that. It made me resilient. It made me have to adapt in the moment as well, which I think is super important to learn how to do and to be able to then apply to future situations. There's been I think a lot of times as well where I've probably like questioned my efficacy, I guess, and maybe kind of questioned whether I actually think I add value in a situation. So I've thought, you know what, I'll stay in my box. I won't speak my mind here. I won't put myself forward, you know. I'll just let it kind of play out, even though I think and I know that to be the wrong outcome. And I think that's obviously something that grows as you build confidence. You actually start to value your voice and your place.
Is that because you feel like you didn't have the knowledge, or because you didn't feel like your voice would be listened to?
I think it's a confidence piece, I didn't think earlier in my career I'd identify things which I didn't agree with, but especially in the environments that I was in, I didn't think that it was the right place or the right time to speak my mind. I think as I've developed and learned, and also probably as I've got more senior in my career, your voice gets louder, right, in those spaces and in those rooms. But I think being able to at least identify it early on as something to develop is half the battle.
Yeah, it's so important when you're trying to make sure that women have a voice, or anybody have a voice and a seat at the table, that we all advocate for each other. And I think so many people often think it's down to the leaders to be able to say, actually, like, Rachel, what's your opinion on this? Or notice that you're a bit quieter in the room. But I actually disagree. I think it's down to everybody. And there's this book that I will quote forever. It's one of my favourite books for women empowerment. It was Viv Groskop's Lift As You Climb. And it's about how everybody lifts each other and not just fight for that top spot. So are there examples in your career that you can remember where you maybe felt like your voice was a little bit diminished, but a peer actually spoke out for you? And how did they navigate that? Because that's a really difficult thing to maybe say in a meeting, like, hey, can everyone listen to Rachel now?
I would say, I think there have definitely been times where I feel like my opinion has been less valued, where it maybe shouldn't have been. For instance, like I worked in a company where we did some work with a company in the Middle East, and they particularly didn't want to work with a woman as their point of contact on that deal, essentially. It's a cultural decision that they wanted to make. So I was the most senior officer in charge of kind of that whole process. And so for every meeting that I did with that company, I had to bring on a more junior male counterpart with me to kind of navigate those meetings. So everything was said to him, which was then said to me. We had to go in this kind of cyclical. Absolutely. And I think, he did a fantastic job as a junior in kind of navigating that. I think it definitely taught me a lot in the way of kind of patience, in the way of knowing what your value is, even if you're up against someone who's pretty starkly telling you that you have no value. So I think that it was a big learning opportunity for me. I have to say that I was lucky enough to be in a company that gave me the option to say, like, if this isn't for you and this is too much, we can take this away, we can put you on something else. It's not going to be a loss to you. So they were very supportive in that sense. But it was definitely quite a challenging and trialing period. I think what the biggest takeaway that I learned from that, and what I've taken, is that kind of resilience piece, is just to kind of keep going and keep pushing forward. Because what I actually learned from that, I could have very easily quit halfway through, right? But actually what I took away and what I learned from that experience, when it comes to patience, when it comes to dealing with people that you don't always like and you don't always get along with, but you have to in business sometimes, I think has been kind of invaluable.
Looking back at that, and I'm so sorry that happened to you, that must have been really tough to deal with. Yeah. How do you wish it would have been handled differently, or are you happy and there's no regrets for, obviously the difference would be that wasn't ever a problem.
100%, right? Yeah, for sure.
Are you happy with the outcome?
The outcome was great. We double billed the customer, so great news for us. But in the end, but I think honestly, like I try really hard not to have regrets. I actually think, like, if I hadn't been through that, I probably wouldn't be as strong as I am now. I probably wouldn't have the convictions I have now when I'm in difficult conversations, when I'm trying to advocate for things. So if I'm honest, no.
Yeah, everything's a learning.
100%.
Never regret. How did you navigate that with the counterpart that was more junior than you? Like, I'm interested to know the dynamic. Were they quite up for being like, no, this is your project? Or was there a bit of a power balance where they thought, oh, well, I'm now the person?
No, to be honest, at the time, they were very, very supportive, very, very we'll go at this as a team. Ultimately, you're the point person, tell me what you need, which was fantastic to have.
Yeah, good. Yeah. So anybody else going through a similar situation to that? I know you said it taught you so much in terms of patience and resilience. But are there any takeaways and learnings from that, of how you actually had that resilience? Because it's very great. It's great to sit here now and reflect back and go, wow, you did so well.
For sure. No, 100%.
What was going through? Did you have any kind of crutches to lean on.
Yeah, 100%. I think have a good support system, and not just professionally, but also personally. Like, there's so much value in being able to come home to your significant other or come home to your friends and just like let yourself have that space to kind of moan about it and have a bit of kind of like decompression on that, definitely. I think appreciate that these aren't going to be your best days. These are probably going to be some of your worst days, right? But ultimately they're going to feed what will be your best days in future. I think that's that was a helpful mentality for me to have, is just kind of like acknowledge the fact that this isn't great, but like it's not going to be great forever, and actually this is going to fuel what is going to be great in the future.
Yeah, no, those are really good points. And this was a very specific example where it didn't, and I guess because I did ask, like, I'd say the other side of like where you did trust your gut and you spoke up. Do you feel like you did, or is there another example that you could give us for where you really did like speak up against something that you didn't agree with?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even kind of like more recently, we've gone through a bit of a structural change at the business. I've been at Funding Circle for kind of a year and a half now. We went through a structural change in sales that I really advocated for. You know, I had to, fight some quite senior people to get that pushed through, because I really believed that to be the right avenue and kind of like the right shift for us to be able to kind of achieve coming into this year. Hard conversations have to be had in those instances, and we had them, and we have now implemented this new structure and this new process. I find those situations a lot easier having had situations where I found really difficult in the past, because if I'm honest, I look back to that and I think, well, nothing's going to be as bad as that. So from now on, it's plain sailing. Not that I'm saying I advise people to put themselves in horrific situations where they're marginalised in order to feed their success in future. But I think my advice is probably to try and take challenges and take hurdles that come about as kind of opportunities.
And then putting this into maybe a wider lens of people that are listening that are maybe hitting some roadblocks with either customers or in their career. It's quite a volatile market at the moment. How do people keep that resilience to either keep going or have the resilience to be like, do you know what, this isn't the right path for me, I need to adapt and change? Is there any advice that you could give from your learnings from this hardship?
100%. I think it's like, ultimately it's about consistency, and I think it's about kind of almost building a structure for yourself, right? So I think if you're following a structure that you know and has proved to have worked, we're talking about a deal, let's say, you know and has proved to have worked in other facets of your work, and you follow that and you're consistent and you utilize that to build credibility with your clients, I think either that will work out in the end or it won't. But I think at least then you can sit down and say to yourself, I've given this everything, I've given this time, and I've been consistent and true to myself and true to what I think and what I want to represent, essentially. I think if there gets to a place where you feel that no longer fulfills you, then maybe that is something to look at a pivot or a change.
Yeah, staying true, being unapologetically yourself.
I think
Rachel.
so.
It
Looping that background to the title.
And then the last piece is courage and confidence. And I mean, with all of these things, they do really link. So, I mean, to be resilient, you've got to be confident and have that courage.
Definitely.
But you wrote in this piece that 50 years ago, women in the UK couldn't even open their own bank accounts without their husband's permission. So I really want to talk about having the financial confidence, because I know it's something that you're really, really passionate about. I was actually just doing a podcast interview with Emma Ward, and we were talking about, I think so many women specifically pigeonhole themselves in saying, this is my area of expertise. I have said this in the past, I am awful at finances. I will not do anything to do with finances or contracts. I'm like, Jack, can you take that? I don't want to look at it because I don't think it's my strength. But actually what I'm doing is I'm doing myself a disservice, because I'm saying that I don't want to touch numbers, but actually there are elements and areas that I maybe could thrive in, but I'm saying that that's not my lane. And I don't think we necessarily have to be in lanes. We can also still be financially literate, understand our numbers, because I think that's really important for progression, to make sure that you've got that backing of the data. So what advice would you give? And I guess, can you explain a little bit of like your annoyance of why women aren't financially confident?
Yeah, 100%. I think, I don't think it's just women, right? I think there's a big gap with kind of like the younger generation of people where I think there's this blocker, and I think people almost kind of like put these like guardrails up around them because they think, it's not my place, or I don't feel confident in that, or I'm going to make a fool of myself if I don't understand these things. I think with a lot of it, it's made to seem and sound a lot more complex than it is.
Oh yeah.
By design,
it's
right?
Rude.
So
It's like when doctors talk to you, like in English.
Yeah, for sure, 100%. So I think there's a lot of really good kind of resources out there. There's like great social media channels that you can follow. Like there's one I can think of at the moment, Elvest, which is great about women in finance and kind of investing, which I think is a really big place that we need to kind of work on in our society at the moment. For me, I think it's so I can't determine, that's not the word I'm looking for, I can't like stress what I think the importance of being financially literate in this world is. I think if you can get to grips even with the basics of even how your company works and how your company makes money and how that looks and what balance sheets looks like, and get comfortable with kind of like looking at P&Ls and things like that, I think there's so much value that can be added, and again so much that can be added to your credibility when you start thinking like a business owner and thinking like a hunter, really.
Yeah, and that is the beauty of sales. I think people always say like people that are entrepreneurial will do really well and thrive in sales because you're almost managing your own business and your own desk.
Definitely.
So if you don't have the numbers and the data, then you're not going to be as successful as maybe you could be.
Yeah.
And I think when we're talking about progressing as well, and this is something that you've got to have that courage and confidence for, is to ask for that promotion, ask for that pay rise. I'm sure being financially literate and understanding the numbers really helps you with knowing your worth.
Yeah, for sure.
How would you advise people to know what they are worth and be able to articulate that to their manager?
100%. And I think this is a big one for me. I think it's two faceted, basically. It's about like being able to pull the data and being able to see where you actually add value beyond what kind of like a baseline is, which as a salesperson you should be able to do from either a revenue perspective or whatever it is from the business. I think the other part is probably actually to almost flip that around. And I think people put a lot of pressure on themselves to be able to come up with the solution for that. I actually think there's a big, I'm a big advocate for kind of sitting down with your boss and actually saying, okay, well, what milestones do I need to hit by this time in order for this to be considered? Because I think that's honestly, it's a big thing that people don't ask me enough. I think if people did that, you'd have better kind of like expectation setting of what that looks like for your future.
And then I think it's really clear as well, if you said to them, I want to get here, what do I need to do to get there?
Yeah.
And they give you that feedback,
yeah.
then you have something to work on. You
100%.
also have that in your bank to be like, right, well, I've ticked these all off. And then you can go in your review and go, I've done exactly what you asked for. But otherwise, I feel like there's a sense of, well, people are probably, I certainly have been, I've been scared in the past to ask for a pay rise or ask for a promotion, because I have this sense of, well, I'm lucky to have a job in a climate that's quite volatile, especially when we were like during COVID. I didn't want to rock the boat because I felt like we were lucky. But actually, no, you need to know your worth and you need to know what you bring to the business. Have you ever encountered that in your career?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's everything I said before. It's about equipping yourself and arming yourself to be able to have those conversations to the best of your ability. Ultimately, definitely there's been times where you feel nervous to ask those questions, you feel like a bit of imposter syndrome, like why would it be me over someone else? But like ultimately you've got to try and like push to have that kind of like confidence and conviction, because it's really, really hard to make people believe in you if you don't believe in yourself.
Yeah. You have shown the most incredible amount of confidence in an interview process. I would love for you to share the story of, well, when you were hit with some horrible comments.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you were confident and had the courage to speak up.
Yeah, it was a very long time ago. It was kind of when I was very early in my career. I was going for a job in a FinTech, and one of the more senior men on the panel asked, and I'm sure it was meant as a let's see how she handles this situation, but I was asked, why do you think our clients would listen to a young blonde 20-something girl? And in the moment, you're just, I know, it's just like hits your gut and you think, right, okay, I've got an opportunity here to try and be a bit clever. So I pinged back with, well, I think they'd listen to a young blonde 20-something girl more than they'd listen to an old bald man. Which, to be fair, was met with some like silence and stifled giggles from the panel.
Did the person laugh that you were saying?
No, I didn't get. I got the job. I didn't take the job.
I didn't get the job. Didn't work. Don't do that. But good for not taking it. You
got the job. Didn't take the job. No,
that's a slap in the face.
Yeah.
Are you happy with that reaction on reflection now?
It's one of those, isn't it? Like, you go back and you think, was it childish? Was it immature? But there's like a little bit of you that still wants to do a bit of fist bump. I think.
Yeah. No, I think it's great. I mean, it's always the way when, like, if you get catcalled or something happens to you, and I always ignore it because I'm shy and I'm like, oh, I hate it. And then I'm like, I wish I did something really sassy or like had this comment. But it's always like hindsight. But you nailed it to be able to say something like that.
Yeah, you say it's hindsight, because I feel like if you don't say it, you think, oh, I should have said something. And then having said it, I also think, should I not have said something? So it's a lose-lose situation, I think.
But I mean, you mentioned there like the feeling of gratification because you were kind of just like get back at them and feel that sense of you've got that power. And when we spoke on our prep call, you said that there's two schools of thought for powerful, successful women, and one of them is rage-fueled. Could you explain a bit about what you think on this?
100%. When I look at kind of like the suite of kind of women in leadership positions across kind of like SaaS sales, fintechs, across the board, I think there's probably like two schools that we kind of like grow women into these positions. So there's two schools of thought on this. I think it's either women who have been really well supported, really well mentored, pushed to do more, pushed to do better through the system and have flourished in that role, which is 100% what I want for all women in leadership moving forward. I think there's also probably like a school of women that I definitely see, and I have peers in this bracket who have got there because they've been told no, have been told they're not good enough times, and they're the type of people who go, well, you know what, I'll show you. And absolute massive respect and props to that bracket of women that are currently in leadership positions and have had to fight their way there. But that is not what I want for the future of women in leadership. I hope much more that it's the former route that we take.
Which route do you think you've taken?
I think I had a mixture. I would actually say more the former. I had really, really good mentors, and I've had good managers. A mix, but everyone has a mix, right? But I've had good leadership to kind of get me to where I am today. I'd say maybe externally in the industries I've worked in, like the clients that I've had have maybe fallen more into the former category, but the companies I've worked for have been really fortunate. So
it hurts me so much that there are women that are out there that have been told you don't deserve this job, you're not good enough.
Yeah.
What would you say to those women that might be listening that have been told that or maybe feel that?
Oh, just look in a mirror and scream sod off to all of those people who said that to you, because it's just like, it riles me so much. And I really hope I feel like we are getting to a place where that is less common, and honestly, like, it's not stood for anymore. So, and I really do genuinely believe that we're now in a position where if people see that, it's called out as opposed to tolerated, which I think is a really good thing. But yeah, I think if you're ever made to feel lesser than because of the fact that you're a woman or the fact that you're diverse, that is your superpower, that's your strength. Diversity in business is such an enormous power for you to have, the different way of thinking, different perspective on things, and it's their fault for not seeing that.
Definitely. And we've spoken a lot about calling out behaviour that's inappropriate, that's not what aligns with your values and what you believe in. To end this piece, and I think this comes back around a lot to having that confidence, it is a really difficult thing. It's great for us to sit here and say this is what you need to do, but if you are in a business that there is inappropriate behaviour, and it's awful that this is still happening and that we're talking about this in 2025.
Yeah, I know.
But you are an IC, maybe junior in your company, and you feel like you don't have the right to call that out because maybe you don't have the courage and confidence, but also you feel like you don't have the respect from your team or your company to be able to call out that behaviour. What advice would you give to those people?
Yeah, 100%. I think I would always advocate for going to your manager, your boss first. I know sometimes that feels like that's not a route that you can take, and I'm really sorry to the people who feel that isn't a route that you can take. If that is the case, I would always advocate for trying to find an ally. It doesn't need to be an ally in your team, but an ally in the business who can kind of help you navigate that, especially as a junior in the business, because actually that's not something you should have to deal with alone. Obviously, I would also always advocate going to HR and a people team. Not all businesses and startups have that, so a combination of those three, if not all, I think is what I'd advise.
Yeah, great advice. And lastly, you mentioned that you've had lots of mentors and allies that have helped you throughout your career. What is the one best bit of advice that they've given you that's really stuck in your mind?
Yeah, I think actually the best piece of advice, and it's actually not been this is not specifically to do with my career, but like a mentor that I had for a really, really long time was an original boss of mine. Knew that as a person I can be someone who really like gets involved. I get really stuck in. I make sure that I've saturated every facet of a problem to make sure that it's solved. I think he could definitely see, especially earlier in my career, that that's something that I would maybe kind of like take out and take home with me and maybe not kind of switch off from. That is a really, really big kind of like piece of advice that I think I would give to people, is to make sure that whether it's your kind of like work persona or whether it's kind of like the projects that you're working on, make sure you kind of leave yourself time to breathe and take a rest from that, because otherwise you will burn out. You will burn out and you'll piss off your other half.
Yeah, you need to decompress.
Yeah.
Did you do that quite a lot, where you like blended the two and you're just like work came into your home?
For sure. And I'm still not perfect at it, right? My husband tells me all the time that I need to stop talking to him like an employee when I get home. There's like a 45-minute period where I'm like, this needs doing. And he's like, can you just take a minute?
Well, that's the last time I'm going to give you any advice if you come home moaning.
Literally.
But I think it's great, and it's an interesting point actually, and I would love to touch on this slightly, is like people now, I think there's this huge I think because people are so driven for success and so passionate about what they do, and we certainly see it in our company, it's like there isn't much of a disconnect between your personal life and your professional life, because they are intertwined. I was even talking to one of my colleagues today about it. Like, I've just started having a mentor, and I always say to her, how deep can we go? Like, is this therapy? Like, do you want me to talk to you about my childhood traumas? But then she's like, well, actually, because sometimes that is the why you're feeling or why you're acting in this way. And that does really, like, getting to the core of and the root of the problem, it really helps. And I'm sure you've seen that as a leader, you've also got to be a bit of a therapist to your team. You've got to manage their performance, you've got to manage like the business side, but then also you've got to be aware of like what's happening with them personally. So you do say like have that disconnect, but where is the line? Because a lot of that does bleed in, and it has to.
100%. And I'm like such an advocate for like, I know everyone who works for me or who like directly reports into me. I know all their wives' names, I know their kids' names, I know their dogs' names. I think that's really important, because actually to be a really effective leader, you've got to understand what drives and motivates people. And without kind of like that school of thought and that understanding, I think you're going to have a really difficult job. I think where I would probably like draw the line is when you're going home yourself and you're spending time with your family and your friends, try not to take that with you, because what will you end up doing is you'll burn out, so your work will be impacted, but also then you're giving kind of 50% to the people that you're doing this for, right? The people that you're showing up and working for to kind of provide for and go home and kind of live a life with. So try and find that balance where you can give, the right parts of yourself to each.
You need that switch off. I need to learn from you how to do that, because I'm very bad
at doing that. Do as I say, not as I do. So.
Can't wait to go home and tell my husband about all the things that have happened. Rachel, thank you so much for coming in today. I've really enjoyed this conversation. But as I end every episode on Sales Unfiltered, what is one challenge that you faced in your career or life that shaped you to where you are today?
Okay, I'm going to give you a bit of a tricky answer to this one. I actually did think about this one quite a lot. I actually even talked to my husband about it last night. I think that I'm going to give you a bit of like you're going to shout at me for this one, but I think the way that I've kind of managed to mold my success is I really do fundamentally try and see everything as an opportunity. And I think I don't really have, one challenge that's defined me. I think what I have done, which has really helped me grow and develop, is take any challenge which is brought to me and try and find a positive in it and spin it. I try my best to be like a pretty positive person and try and find a positive outlook on everything. And if I'm honest with you, I think that attitude and having that from quite an early age in my life has really kind of like defined where I am today.
I'm not going to shout at you. It's fine.
No,
but I love that. I mean, it just completely relates back to what you said at the beginning with that horrible encounter that you went through that has taught you so much. And I always believe like a failure is not a bad thing. It's a learning on how to be better. And if you don't fail in life, like you're never going to grow and never be better.
100%. Yeah, so it's like I think you learn. It's such a typical like stock answer, isn't it? But you learn so much more from your failures than you do from your wins.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. Well, say well done to your husband. He helped you with a good one.
Will do. Yeah, will do.
Anyway, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming in and chatting to me, and I can't wait to see where you go in your career.
Thanks so much. Cheers.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Sales Unfiltered. If you enjoyed this conversation, I would love for you to hit the subscribe button. And if you're feeling extra generous, leave us a quick review. See you next week.